Okay.
Welcome to Tony at 12. I'm Tony LeBlanc, and today I'm in conversation with John Young, civil servant, Jersey politician, and in Civvy Street, an accomplished manager. Alderney viewers will remember John as the gentleman who steered us through the land use plan. Good to see you.
Good morning, Tony. Good to talk.
It is indeed. So, we're going to go through the usual interrogation here, John. First of all, the start of your career. Have you always been in public service?
Kind of almost. I checked it back. I left school at 17, didn't get any A-levels, didn't go to university. And then I went to work at a supermarket and found out it was hard work. So I went into local government in the 1960s in London. And that was the kind of start. And I think I kind of got hooked on it.
Yeah.
And by the time I was, it's about 6 years later, I'd probably done all the accountancy exams in those days and secured quite a decent career. And so, I lost count on how many different local government authorities I worked for in the UK. But obviously, that's before I came to Jersey.
And what brought you to Jersey?
Well, Jersey were at them time in the boom years of '79. The tourism industry and the finance industry was taking off, and their public sector couldn't cope with the accounting requirements. And the money was flooding in, and so they had a program of recruiting UK public sector accountants.
So that's how you got in on it.
And yeah, it is. And of course, I had lots of different roles in Jersey after that, but that was the start.
Well, of course, Mrs. Young comes into the picture somewhere, doesn't she? So,
Yeah, that's a little more complicated because I came with two children and brought children up. But of course, sadly, like many relationships, that changed in later years. Yeah. So I've been married to a Jersey girl for the last 15 years.
So you are a Jersey man by marriage?
Yeah, I'm by an adoption. Yes, I call myself an adopted Jerseyman. I've been here 44 years. That's a hell of a while. Yeah. And of course, the big debate in Jersey: what's a Jerseyman? Jersey person these days. I think I count myself as an honorary Jerseyman.
Yeah. So I think in any of the islands, you never get totally 100% accepted.
No, you don't.
But you can get fairly close to that 100%.
Yeah, and of course, all my grandchildren are all born here and everything. So, there's
okay.
There's a legacy here.
Yeah. Okay, you talked about being involved in the accounting side of the civil service. Did you play any other roles in the Jersey civil service?
Yeah, I went there as an expert in audit and investigations, and then this kind of started with the growth in computers. And I was lucky. I managed to get a lot of training in then computer technology, and I became a specialist in computerized accounting systems and techniques. So I did all that, set up the state's accounts in those days. And then I think I decided that I was then asked to go and become the hospital financial services and the clinical systems information. So all the patient systems were all my responsibility, and running the health service finance. Very different circumstances in those days, Tony. There was plenty of money. We didn't have the problems that the health service has got now.
Well, that's right.
And then I got moved. They invited me there, and having successfully carried that role, well, would you like to take on the troubled area of what was then the Island Development Committee, which was the planning department? And of course, that became a 13-year stint when I developed it into the environment department and expanded its role significantly. I was head of that, and I ended up with about 150 staff. And then the states of Jersey and yours truly party company, when they decided that my face didn't quite fit in those days. That's around 2004, Tony. So 25 years stint working for the states, and that led to my starting work in the private sector.
Yeah. Okay. And then, of course, at what point did you decide to take up politics?
Well, I think I've always had a strong interest in politics. In fact, in the 70s in London, I was in fact active at a very local level in local politics, not as an elected role. But I decided when I went to Jersey to leave that aside. I thought, put family first, park that. And so it was always there. But of course, in my civil servant role, I was operating at a level advising politicians.
Mm.
And of course, what I found that was very amenable was that in Jersey, although it's a fairly conservative place, the kind of policies that members wanted were very more towards the middle of centre ground and interventionist. And that, that really gave me great scope for learning, understanding, and seeing how, putting policies into action, which I think were pretty successful in the period I was there.
Yeah, yeah. My next question is, John, does committee government work? Because we see that in Alderney, we see that in Guernsey, we see that in Jersey. And, when I first came here,
yeah.
I thought, this is going to be great, no party politics. But
well, Tony, the issue in Jersey is not resolved. We've had a lot of experience. Jersey introduced the ministerial system in 2006. I know it well because one of my last tasks as chief officer was to work and produce the nuts and bolts of the transition, which I did from the committee system into, so I worked on a small team. And of course, what I've been able to see is, if you like, the pros and cons of where the committee system worked and where it didn't. And it's quite a complicated list. If you want, Tony, I can sort of kind of try to scan through it quickly, if you like.
Well, just fairly quickly, if you can, because we obviously have time limitations.
Okay. Well, with committees, of course, the beauty is all members feel involved. There's no need for any full-time politicians. And if you get good committee leadership, you can get the best out of people. And as the communication is really good. You can kind of get a consensus. And of course, the electorate quite likes it. But unfortunately, it doesn't really give you long-term strategies and goals and policy setting. And also, it can tend to be unstable because you can get a lot of personal politics and squabbles and fallings out and votes of no confidence. So, and it's not as efficient as ministerial government. Ministerial government can move like a train, but of course, people may not like it. And so that really takes you to the agenda of party politics. What system of election do you need to support a ministerial system? And then that is where Jersey has not got there at all. We have an undeveloped party politics system.
But you do have parties.
We do. There's been quite a lot of attempts. At the moment, we've got one successful party, the Reform Party, which has done well. It's now got 10 members in the States. And I fear at the moment they're kind of almost assigned to a role of full-time opposition. And that's not really, I don't think, the most productive way. And what we have, all other efforts to form parties have kind of fallen, either half failed or underachieved. Ironically, our government in Jersey is now made up of a group of people called the Better Way, who they didn't actually form a party. But the trouble is, they got in, people like the look of them, they got elected. But the trouble is, in my view, there's no policy base there. So in the end, there's no clarity about what they're standing for. So parties give you that clarity. And I think that's a journey which has still got some years to run in Jersey.
Yeah, yeah. Now, you were a politician when Brexit took place. And I believe that gave you a few problems.
Yeah, if you want my views on my view, and I'm very, very strong. I think Brexit was an absolute piece of we damaged our own economy. I think it was a piece of economic vandalism, and I think it's proven to be very damaging for the Channel Islands. That's my personal view.
Okay.
It's cost us a lot of money for a lot of bureaucratic changes of laws and everything for no gain whatsoever. What we've now got is it's fractured connections between communities and sports and artistic and heritage groups and all this type of thing. Massively damaged our relationship with our immediate neighbours and given us huge overheads and complications in every walk of life. And it's denied opportunities to our young people to go and live and work in the wider world. And frankly, we've not seen the advantages we were told about. Jersey, like Guernsey and Alderney, we didn't have a choice. The choice was take it or leave it. Had we left it, we would have left ourselves even more isolated, because we would have had borders between the UK and we'd have been out of the common travel area and all that kind of thing. But I was on the group that tried to put this together, and frankly, I was shocked at the way working with UK government ministers. I mean, 4 days to decide yes or no on a 1,000-page deal just absolutely was deplorable, really. But that's where we are, Tony. There's one good thing. I recall that agreement, they called it the Trade and Economic Cooperation Agreement, has got a review date, and I can't remember whether it is. It's over 3 or 5 years.
Yeah.
And I sincerely hope there's an opportunity to review that, and it's taken.
Is it true that as part of the procedure, they only realised at the last minute that they should include the Crown dependencies?
No idea, Tony. What happened was that all this went on at civil servants level through the what we then had a ministry called the External Affairs. That was all done by civil servants. They worked really hard, for several years. But in the end of the day, it came down to a 1,000-page agreement several days before the Brexit cut-off date, and of which about 30 pages related to Channel Islands. We were out for most things, but we were in for fishing and environment. And a lot of the assurances that I were given that there wouldn't be any detrimental changes on environmental matters to do with food safety and food security, all of that has proven to be illusory. And the ministers that I work with have all long since gone under what's the shambles that's happened in the UK. So I'm afraid we're left with the residue of the fallout of that, I think, very bad period. That's my views, Tony.
Because there were big problems with the fishing side and the French, wasn't there?
Oh, my word. I mean, that was the media. I mean, I spent several years having to do conversations with ministers in France, with regional officials and my own officials, and national ministers, particularly, I'll mention his name, George Eustace, who was then the Environment Minister, and Victoria Parentis, she was the Assistant Minister. And, you know, we came under intolerable pressure. We didn't really have any great choices. My personal view was try to moderate the damage and work within this licensing agreement we were presented with, and to try and do my best to ensure there was fair play in the allocation of licenses to the French. But it was not such a situation. Fortunately, things are now improving in Jersey, but they're far from what they used to be.
Let's change the subject a bit. What are your views on decarbonisation, John?
Well, I'm very, look, I've always been passionate about the environment. And of course, I remember when I did the Open University, I did that in later life in the 70s. Obviously, the scientists in those days were predicting what we're now seeing. So this is not a new concept, Tony, that somehow or other global warming has suddenly surprised us. We've known about it for decades and not responded to it. And we're now in the last chance saloon. So we have to. Now, the downsides for the islands and small communities are facing massive costs. And in Jersey, I think, when I did the thing called the carbon reduction route map to phase out the generation of carbon, and basically you're talking probably £500 million replacement of boilers, insulation of homes, phasing out petrol and diesel cars, and so on. And where's that money going to come from? A lot of people can't pay for it. How's that going to be funded? But the opportunity is there, Tony, is that we've got the option for renewable energy in the islands, we're sitting on a massive, massive resource. So in Jersey now, I'm very pleased about this. The swing has gone strongly in favour of offshore wind. And I made sure that the framework for that was all put in place through marine planning policies and the island plan policies. And now I'm very pleased that current politicians are following that through. So I hope to see that happens, because we can't carry on being dependent on the French with electricity supply, because obviously look what happened during the Brexit and fishing. They threatened to cut us off. And of course, we know these cables don't last forever. And the French, of course, have advised Jersey recently that they can't guarantee the supply of of the power coming across our cable as being all renewable through nuclear and from hydro. So we need to provide for that ourselves. There's big opportunities, Tony, and it pays because all forecast shows that an offshore capability could provide 4 times Jersey's needs for its own power.
Yeah,
and that means exporting power to France, obviously, and generating income.
Yeah.
So, it's an investment issue.
Because a lot of people say that, if you follow through the rules in terms of boilers and motor cars and everything else, you're going to have to triple up on the capacity of the grid to actually withstand that. So,
I think a lot of people, it's absolutely correct. I mean, if you talk to fortunately, we've got our own electricity provider, Jersey Electricity, which is majority government owned. Yeah, there needs to be big investment in our network, in the grid.
Yeah.
And of course, that has to be paid for. So that must be all part of any investment appraisal. So I think where this takes us down is the classic, the classic investment appraisal projects. And all of the portents are now moving in our favour with the cost of offshore wind and so on.
Can you actually raise money in Jersey for these sort of projects fairly easily?
Oh, now you've got me. Look, Tony, we've seen the transformation in recent months. Look, not too long ago, government was talking about borrowing 800 million for our hospital in Jersey. We've got a housing program of 250 million. And so there's waterfront developments in the pipeline of hundreds of millions. Borrowing was the preferred option, providing, of course, the schemes were viable in terms of payback, the ability to fund the debt, and obviously giving us a return over a period. That's the equation. But all that equation has been turned on its head now. Now we're looking at interest rates, due to the UK government complete fiasco, which I don't think anybody forecast that we could see such a disastrous piece of behaviour which would destroy the markets. So that has changed the numbers, Tony, and I think we are waiting to see where that settles, aren't we?
Yeah, I think so.
It's messed up people's personal lives as well with their mortgages.
Yeah.
And affected investment. So look, I think we're gonna, it's too early to say. Can we borrow? Well, our credit rating is very high still.
Yeah.
But you've still got to make these investments viable.
And it costs a lot of money to create a bond or something like that, doesn't it? Because
you've got to go to a minimum size of bonds.
Yeah.
And I think Jersey's at the size where we can do that.
Yeah.
But at the moment, I think they need to talk with the current finance minister, Senator Ian Gorse. It's not senator, we've lost all that now, haven't we? He's deputy Ian Gorse, and to tell you where we are on this borrowing, on the borrowing policy.
Can we do a little bit of a comparison between Jersey and Guernsey now? Because obviously, this should be a bit of fun. Has Jersey adopted international accounting standards?
Yes, well, Tony, we're pleased to know I probably spent a good half an hour researching the accounts.
Good. We like our guests to do this.
I thought, crikey. Well, I'm pleased to report that Jersey has definitely adopted international financial reporting standards in its own published accounts. But of course, a Jersey company that's not mandatory. Jersey companies can either adopt that standard, or they can go for gap standards of all the various gestations that you've got, US, UK, China, all the rest of it. They can choose that, but government itself has gone for that standard. And we've had that in a number of years. And so when I look through the state's accounts, wow, they are sophisticated. I was very impressed with they've gone a mile since I worked with the state's treasury when they were relatively basic. And of course, I was able to look at Guernsey's, and I noticed, Tony, that Guernsey's on the transition. It's just started that journey.
It's a long transition, John. They were talking about it 10 years ago, I think.
Well, and I didn't see the depth of sophistication in their accounts that I was seeing in the Jersey. It's well worth a browse for anybody who looks at it. I thought, well, what do I do? Well, if Tony wants an analysis, I thought to myself, I think, well, you might have to issue a consultancy to advise the differences between the Jersey and the Guernsey ones. But there are a few sort of headlines.
Yeah, yeah,
Guernsey obviously reported, I think, I'm going to refer to my notes if I can, sadly. I think Guernsey reported about 130 million loss or something, deficit 135, well, that obviously includes investment losses.
yes.
Now, their operating deficit was quite small. £3 million was the operating deficit. We're talking 2022.
Yeah.
Now, in Jersey's operating had an operating surplus of 155 million. But in our consolidated accounts, when we consolidate all the arm's length companies and all of the funds, Social Security, they're very, very complex, Tony. We ended up with a deficit of 63 million before investment reevaluations. But if we put investment reevaluations in, that makes a 268 million deficit. Now, that seems a huge amount of money, but of course, one, we haven't lost any money. They are reevaluations of assets. They are not sales. We haven't incurred that loss. It's just the reevaluation because the stock market or the market took a massive hit in 22 compared to 21.
Yeah.
So one that obviously looks at the operating surplus, which I think in Jersey is positive. And you've highlighted obviously the difference that Jersey has GST income, but it's not the only one. It's not the only difference between the two.
No. But I mean, it is obviously significant. So the question there is, if you didn't have your sales tax GST, your deficit would be considerably higher.
Oh yeah, well yeah, and because there's no question that I think we've all got used to GST. I can remember when we had to introduce it. We had to introduce it when all the islands were decided to go for the 0-10 tax system, where corporate tax was 0. And of course, then both islands, I think, have made a bit of a modification. Guernsey introduced this kind of retail tax on big operators, and Jersey tried to do the same thing, but it's not very satisfactory. And of course, shifting the or much flexible than the system used to be when we had corporate tax and we had all that source of income there. So GST was a good substitute. I think when you ask, well, where's the gap in Jersey? The gap in Jersey is that we don't have a property tax.
Yeah.
Where in Guernsey, of course, you have TRP.
Yeah.
And of course, that could be. And one of my sort of campaigns in Jersey was to try and get them to look seriously at adopting a TRP equivalent in Jersey, because property income that Jersey gets at the moment is a miserable £15 million. And that's this thing called, it's all very complicated, island rate. And it wasn't agreed in Jersey because the parishes get really upset about taking their autonomy away. And but I'm hoping it will come back because it's a potential source. And it's something that can respond to the economy very well by differential rates of tax and all the rest of it. So I think Guernsey's TRP is, although people may not like it, I think it's an important source of income.
Yeah. Looking at the 5%, any idea how much you actually end up with after you knock out the administration?
I looked it up, 118 million Jersey levies off there.
Yeah.
And there's unfortunately in my reading of the accounts raised some questions to me which I haven't got answers to. But retail contribution was 43% of that. So 43% of that came from retail shops, and hospitality about 36%.
But does it apply on services, accountancy fees?
Oh yeah, everything. Yes, everything. Yeah,
across the board.
Yes, it is. And that's the rule. That's the policy that they decided. They would have no exemptions.
Yeah. Okay.
And of course, there's been various attempts over the years politically to exempt certain things. But basically the system is accrued tax. It's got a very low cost of collection. The collection is done automatically. And of course, recently Jersey has adopted a very low de minimis limit. And in fact, it's now come to an arrangement with the big UK online retailers that they charge that GST at source. These are the people that, you know, for internet buying.
So if
And
you bought
so,
from Amazon, for example,
yeah,
Amazon would
well, yeah,
pile on the
right.
5%
Yes,
Jersey tax.
yes, they would. Absolutely
Yeah,
correct. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, you know, that obviously improves the situation in terms of processing goods, doesn't it? You don't want to put every single thing through the customs.
Well, I think it's created a bit of a problem in terms. Well, yes, because but we still have. You know, I've still experienced delays. There's no getting around it. If your parcel gets held up by Jersey Customs, it's a pain.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I mean, it really can delay and all the rest of it. But I think people put up with it now, Tony, in Jersey.
Yeah. I mean, looking at Guernsey, as you know, they very nearly got GST approved. I think they were a few votes out on it, but they've got to do something about it, haven't they?
Well, I found it, and I was astonished when the offer came that they would have that as a condition of putting forward GST,
Yeah.
that they would have a low tax rate of 15% on low income earners.
Yeah.
I think that was what they said,
Yes.
and exempt food.
Yeah.
Exempt food.
Yeah.
Well, we must have debated that in Jersey. I've lost count a number of times, and it's been lost every time. Jersey, if it was in Jersey, people would bite your hand off for that solution. And of course, Alderney, I think, also had an assurance that GST wouldn't apply in Alderney as well. And I thought this seemed to be a very, very positive thing.
I think they eventually accepted the fact that it would be bailiwick wide, but you know, it seemed to me they were offering.
Did they? Okay,
yeah,
so
I
I'm
think
out.
So. Yeah, because the states of Alderney supported the concept, but we have this situation where they're offering a reduced rate of income tax, either a 15% rate or an increase in allowances. They're also knocking the social security down, so in terms of contributions there. And I've never been able to get an answer as to at what point do you get the tipping point to actually make the tax work after you've sort of given all these other concessions.
Well, you have to get it right, don't you, Tony? I mean, Guernsey, when it introduced GST, decided that the way we compensate the lower paid in Jersey is there's a social security allowance for people who receive income support benefits to get a lump sum every year to offset the GST element. And I can't remember what he was, but there is a lot of criticism of that. That's one, not well known, and people, you know, the take up rate is not that great. But you know, at the moment, I think Jersey needs GST. I cannot see a situation in which it would be abandoned now. Well, I suppose there is one that if ever 010 was properly reviewed, if the whole situation of corporate tax were to change, and that probably would need to change by international agreement or the agreement between the crown dependencies, I think, the offshore jurisdictions. If ever that were to change, then we would be able to widen the tax base. At the moment, I think we're all in the situation where our tax bases are pretty narrow, aren't we?
Well, I think so. In comparing what your liabilities are in terms of infrastructure products and projects and everything else.
Yeah. I mean, but though Jersey's finance sector pays 10%, there's a 10% tax 10% income tax for profits of financial services businesses.
Yeah.
And there's a 20% tax on profits of those businesses that trade in property.
Yes. Yeah.
So there are those exceptions.
Yeah, but you know, the fact of the money is, I think, fact of the matter is that for years we've all been sort of living in cloud cuckoo land almost, in terms of the fact that we need these things done, but we're not prepared to pay for them.
Well, of course, I can remember back. I used to use that phrase in the 80s and the 90s, where you had corporate tax and the levels of income tax being paid were so low, and the public services were of a very, very high standard with very substantial funding.
Yeah.
And I thought this was a bit of a fool's paradise. But of course, then that has led us in Jersey to believe that this can carry on. And
Mm.
of course, we've seen the situation since the year 2000 or 2000 thereabouts, where we started to see all of the indicators flatlining. Our GDP started to flatten off. I think
Yeah.
it was around 2002, 2003, and our efficiency, labour efficiency, has been declining. So flatlining GDP is a bad sign, isn't it, for the
Well,
future?
very much so. Very much so. You've got to see an increase on these things. Otherwise, as you say, you're going backwards.
Yeah, and of course we've been looking for new industry. We've been looking for, IT, for example. We thought that might be
Mm.
a way where we could open up a new line of industry. I think my take at the moment is I don't think we've found it, but of course there is no question. I think green renewables and the
Yeah.
industry that would follow from an investment in green energy,
Yeah.
I think potentially could give the Channel Islands a real foothold in this and develop our local economy and all the expertise and the servicing and all the rest of it. Because after all, look, we've got this huge potential of offshore wind. We've got the massive tidal potential of even more energy in the longer
Yeah.
run.
Yeah. In the longer term.
And also we've got the potential for blue carbon. So, which is where you carbon fix in our seas,
Yeah.
because we've got shallow seas,
Yeah.
which can be used for huge potential
Yeah.
for global warming work. So I think we've got a real line of future there, and I hope our governments, respectively, in Jersey, and I think it needs the Channel Islands working together. I've always wanted that. Working together on trying to harness this for the long future, for our children and our grandchildren, for the economies of the future.
It makes so much sense to work together on these matters because, if you sort of aggregate Jersey and Guernsey and Alderney, you've got the talent there, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, if you work together, it doesn't mean to say you remove each other's identities.
No, that's right.
Separate identities and our cultures and the way of doing things. But what it means is on the really big things, on the really big strategic policy, the strategic projects where we've all got investment in the future, closer working together. And I've always thought that perhaps one way might be doing that is to form some kind of federation
Yes.
where we just for the higher level stuff.
Yeah.
So we still run our own businesses in the way we do stuff and that kind of thing. But we've got this other arrangement in place to be more covered. It's like a federal structure, isn't it? I don't quite know.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess you could compare it with Westminster and the devolved powers in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
Well, I suppose I hesitate
like
to even talk about the US. I mean,
but I mean, it's clearly something that's got to be done. But having said that, I was reading something a few weeks ago where Guernsey currently sends putrid waste to Sweden, and what they weren't too keen to send it to you so you could burn it and create power. That's crazy.
Well, I know when I was the minister, there was an openness to do refuse processing, to share that out, to help out one another. And so I actually amended our law to allow that to happen. But of course, it wasn't taken up.
Yeah. But
I'm not pushing this. It's just that
it's a
fact to do it, to open up, to allow it to happen. Because we've all got international agreements of transboundary. I think they call it the transboundary movement of waste. There's an international protocol that you are not allowed to deal with for disposal, but you're allowed to deal with for recovery, and so on. And so, therefore, the way you deal with these wastes, you have to deal with it professionally.
Yeah. But to send it to Sweden is absolutely stupid, isn't it? The amount of carbon that must be emitted to do that.
Well, I've always look, because I love all this a bit, and also I've always been very fond of Guernsey, and still am. But so I don't like to run down some of these things.
No.
But of course, but Jersey's got a energy from waste recovery plant. But everybody accepts that this is not the long-term thing. Jersey's on a journey.
Yeah.
to find better ways of waste processing,
Mm.
which are more sustainable,
Mm.
because we still pollute some some carbon into the atmosphere from our energy from waste plants.
Yeah.
And so that's a task in hand. And of course, Guernsey has done so much better in reducing its domestic waste production.
Yeah, the
Ours is just,
recycling.
yeah, and I think that leads to the subject of waste charges. So where could Jersey learn from Guernsey? Well, waste charging. I can tell you that now. And I still am a strong advocate of Jersey doing that.
Okay, well, on that basis, I'm afraid we're going to have to close off
All right,
because we're
Tony,
right up to the
okay.
limit. But it's been
All
a
right.
pleasure to talk to you as ever and to see you. And, you know, keep in touch.
Thanks. One last thing, that all the opinions are my own. They're
Oh,
not
realise that. Yes,
Jersey,
yes,
they're
yes, yes, yes.
entirely my
No,
own.
no,
There we are.
absolutely, absolutely. We'll make sure that that's left in along with everything else. Thanks,
Thanks very
John.
much. Thanks, Tony. All the
Cheers.
best.
And you.
Bye.
Bye.